If you recently lost a spouse and you are navigating through that time shortly after where you're trying to understand what you have and what does life mean going forward and how do you address all of that, then first thing I would ask you to take a look at is to create what's called a personal balance sheet. What does that mean? It means get together a listing of the different assets that you have, which would be things like the bank accounts, the investment accounts, any real estate that you own, your personal residence, um, and understand what you have going forward. And then we'll have to figure out how that's going to work for you going forward. It's not uncommon for a spouse to pass when the different assets really have not been identified. There's not a clear list of what the family owns. There is not a set of directions on what to do when that spouse passes and really how to handle things. So as you're building that personal list, if you don't have that list and your spouse recently passed, let me go through a few things that can be helpful for you as you begin to build that and put that together. So I'd say the first thing you want to look at is your bank statements. Make sure you understand what bank statements you actually have and see how those are titled. It's important they're titled, of course, where you have control as the surviving spouse. And sometimes the banks, well, not sometimes, the banks have to follow very, very specific rules on how accounts are titled. So you want to understand what were the family accounts before your spouse passed, and you need to regain control of those. So you may need to go to the bank with the death certificate. You may need to go along with your estate documents that have your will and trust and that kind of thing, and go talk with them and show them those documents so that the bank will understand that those accounts need to come to you. And there's always a process of paperwork, but that's one thing that you want to do. Understand what you have at the bank. I'd say also what you want to take a look at is look at the last 12 to 18 months of those bank statements and see what expenses were going through there. Because you might see payments going through there that you're not sure what the heck those are. And it could be payments for life insurance policies, which would be very important right about now that you know what life insurance policies are there. So any payment you see going through the bank or a credit card statement for that matter, anything that looks like it's going to an insurance company, that tells you a couple of clues. If it's a life insurance company, then maybe there's a life insurance policy there that maybe you weren't aware of. If it's a premium to insure something, well, that tells you there's an asset out there, a boat, a car, an RV, or something that there is an insurance policy on, and that thing probably has some value. So any payments you see to what look like to be an insurance company, then you want to call that insurance company and ask them what that policy, what is that payment for? They call it a premium. So what is this premium for? And you can be specific. It's for $529.13 on May 15th. Be specific. They'll know then that there's an actual payment that you are aware of. And they might not be able to release any information to you if you are not the owner of that policy, but at least now you have a clue that there is something there that is of value, and you can begin to track it down. I'd say also take a look at the tax returns because your tax returns have a lot of good information in them. And part of what you're going to see on there is a schedule of interest and dividends. So those are produced from investment accounts or from bank accounts. So you will see on that tax return interest being paid by somebody. Well, who was that? Hopefully, when you find the bank accounts, you see and you can account for all that interest, but that's not always the case. So you might have to follow that paper trail and understand where the asset is and then regain control of that asset. Same thing for dividends. You'll see dividends on your tax return, and dividends are paid because there was something of value, typically a stock. There is a stock somewhere that has value. It paid a dividend, and that dividend made it onto your tax return. So now you've got to find that stock, that asset, so you can regain control of it. I would take a close look at both bank statements and credit card statements for the last 18 months. And you want to look line by line. What was that charge for? What was that payment for? And it can be a very exhaustive, a very draining, a very emotional draining process. So obviously, when you're going through a time of grieving, and it can be a very heavy burden to carry, going through these kind of papers and that just might not really be possible. Find somebody to help you and have them go through this line by line. They're looking for what looks like insurance premiums. They're looking for anything that looks like it's some kind of subscription. What was that subscription for? And I'd say also run that free credit report. You can get a free credit report online. There are 3 companies that'll provide that to you: TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. Those give a free credit report every year. So you may have to set up an account online using data that you would have access to, that you would know, and you can pull that free credit report. That credit report will tell you if there are any loans or credit cards that are in your spouse's name, the spouse who deceased. And that may be the only way you find them, because sometimes we have credit cards and we tear them up and throw them away, but we don't close those accounts. That means there's a line of credit out there that is still open that somebody could tap into and rack up a bill that now comes to your home because you just weren't aware of it. So take a look at that free credit report and look at everything on it to make sure that you understand what it is, so that you can either close it if it's still open, or at least be aware of it once you know what it is. And then once you've built that listing of assets that belong to the family, and now you're able to then follow up and regain control of those. You'll have to call each of those places. They might be very reluctant to give you information if your name is not how that asset is titled. So you may have to explain to them the situation. They may ask you for a death certificate. They may ask you for other documentation as well. And because they have to protect it for the owner. And they're doing that for the benefit of the owner, which may be your deceased spouse. So understand where they're coming from. Yes, it can be very frustrating. It can be very, very emotionally draining to go through this process, but it is necessary so that you can regain control of all of the assets that you and your spouse had together. And they were intended, of course, for you and your family. You just have to go through the exercise with each of these companies to regain control. And it's important to also understand that there is not a lot of consistency amongst companies. So let's say there are 3 life insurance policies out there, and they're each going to have 3 different ways for you to then regain control and maybe get that life insurance payout. They are not always consistent. So you're going to have to be a little patient in talking with them, so that you understand what they're asking for and you can provide what they're asking for. So not a fun process, of course. And once you understand, and once you now have control of those assets, then it's a matter of looking at your life going forward, and how do those assets now help you go forward in a way that makes sense. You'll often hear people say, and I will say this myself, that when a spouse passes, you don't want to make any major changes right away, because you are in a place where you're grieving and you're not as sharp as you normally are, because of that grief that can be extremely, extremely overwhelming. So the general thought is don't make any decisions right now, any major decisions right now. Keep things where they are. And then 6, 12 months later, when some time has passed, then it's time to take a look and rethink what you're doing. Are you in the right home? Should you stay in that home? Should you get a smaller home? If you have rental properties, should you maybe get rid of those rental properties or get more rental properties? But understanding what you have is very important, so that you know what you have for monies coming in to support the lifestyle that you have right now today. And will that lifestyle have to change? Maybe. Will you want it to change? Maybe you will. Maybe you don't want to be in that home anymore, or maybe you do want to be in the home. But those are all things that you'll need to think about after. And you've got to look at the cash that is coming in, of course, and look at the expenses going out to make sure that it's all going to work, that those numbers all work, that you can still maintain that lifestyle that you've become accustomed to. And the assets that you have, you may have to do some changing there with the assets and the investments so that they can now produce the cash flow that is necessary for you to go forward. Because um, when you're a married couple, the lifestyle is one thing, and maybe there were things you were doing that made sense as a couple. Maybe there were investments that made sense when you were a couple. But now that you are one, now that you are not with the spouse any longer, now some of those investments, they might not make sense anymore. Some of the things that you were doing and spending money on, they might not make sense anymore. So you've got to really take a look at that whole picture and understand the picture and put that new plan together, build that as you begin to get yourself in a position where you can now continue with your life in the in this new time when you no longer have that spouse there with you, walking down that path going forward with you. Hopefully this is helpful for you, and that's the whole intention. This can help you somehow, some way.